A house can look perfect for exactly long enough to make you stop asking hard questions. And that's the dangerous part. You walk through the front door, the place smells clean, the photos are accurate, and the kitchen looks updated, and nothing really obvious jumps out at you. So for a first-time buyer, especially if you're moving on military orders and trying to make a decision and quickly, that kind of showing feels like relief. It's like, finally, a house that does not feel like a project. But then the seller disclosure shows up, and buried somewhere in that paperwork is a sentence that looks harmless at first glance, and it says, previous moisture noted in the crawl space. And that's not dramatic, right? It doesn't sound like a disaster. Most buyers read that and they go, eh, and then they move on to the next page. But I don't move on to the next page yet. That one sentence changes my job from helping you decide whether you like the house to helping you figure out what the story is that the house is actually telling. Because the problem with seller disclosures is that they rarely scream, they usually whisper. So today I want to talk through the exact kinds of disclosure statements that make me slow down, ask some better questions, and sometimes completely change the way I think about a property. So this isn't about being scared of every single house. It's about knowing which details deserve some pressure before you end up owning the problem. So let's start with that crawl space example, because in Charleston, moisture is not some random side issue. Humidity, drainage, heavy rain, older construction, anything with a crawl space, coastal conditions, and any deferred maintenance, all those things can collide underneath the house without the buyer seeing much during a showing. So now imagine that disclosure says, previous moisture noted in the crawl space. Now, a nervous buyer is going to hear that and think, oh my God, the house is bad. And a careless buyer is going to hear that and say, well, you know, it was previous, so it must be fine. But both of those reactions are too quick. The better move is to get specific. Was this a one-time plumbing leak from a failed pipe, or does the crawl space just take on a ton of water after every major storm? Did someone install a vapor barrier? Did they improve grading, add a sump pump, repair ductwork, replace insulation, or did they treat for mold? Was there a licensed contractor involved, or did the seller just like throw a fan under the house and hope the problem went away? All those details are going to be important because two houses can use almost identical disclosure language but carry completely different levels of risk. So here's the version that does not bother me quite as much. The seller says, we had a supply line leak under the kitchen in 2021. A plumber repaired the line, mitigation company came and they dried out the area, they've got the invoices, and there's been no recurrence. Now that's still worth inspecting, but now we have a very clear event, a clear repair, and a clear timeline. So here's a different story. The seller writes that moisture was noted in the crawl space, but there's no receipts, there's no contractor notes, there's no explanation of the source, and there's no answer when we ask whether it happens again every time it rains. So now I'm not just looking at a disclosure, I'm looking at some uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is where buyers start to lose their leverage. So if you're under contract and your inspection period is short, you do not want to discover on day 8 that the vague crawl space sentence actually points to a $12,000 moisture remediation issue. So that is why disclosure issues matter and why they matter early. It tells us where to aim the inspection, who we might need to call, and whether the seller's explanation actually sounds complete. So the same thing happens with roof leaks. Now, disclosure might say roof leak repaired. Now, that could mean a small flashing issue around a vent boot that was fixed correctly years ago. It could mean that the seller patched a symptom while the actual roof just kept aging beyond its useful life. So I want to know what failed, I want to know who repaired it, I want to know whether the interior damage, if any, was involved, and I want to know if there's any warranty that came with the work. Because when a roof leak connects to ceiling stains, attic moisture, insurance claims, or repeated repairs, the conversation starts to get way more serious. Now, that does not automatically mean you need to walk away. It just means you need to stop treating the disclosure like paperwork and start treating it like a trail. So now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood phrases in real estate. Foundation repair completed. Buyers see that and they immediately start picturing the house just collapsing into a giant sinkhole. And sometimes foundation problems are serious. There's no question about that. But I've also seen buyers get more nervous about a repaired foundation with documentation than they are about visible cracks with no explanation at all. And that's backwards, to be honest with you. A foundation repair with an engineer's report, a qualified contractor, a transferable warranty, and a documented scope of work can still be evaluated. You may still decide that that's not for you, but at least the issue has a file. But a house with some sloping floors, where every stair step is cracked or creaking, the doors are kind of sticking, there's patched drywall and no disclosure history, that makes me way less comfortable, not more comfortable. The repair is not always the scariest part, but the absence of a credible explanation, a lot of times that's worse. So let's make this practical. Suppose the disclosure says that the foundation was repaired in 2019. The seller provides the engineer's report showing what was found, they have a contractor invoice showing what was installed, the warranty paperwork, all that, they transfer it to the next owner. During the inspection, the crawl space looks stable, the repair appears to be consistent with all the documentation, and there's no new movement noted in the foundation. So that still deserves some attention, but it's not automatically a deal killer. So now let's picture a different version. The seller checks yes to structural repairs, but they can't explain what happened. No invoice, no engineer, no permit record where one was probably required. Nobody remembers who did the work because the previous owner just handled it. So that is where I start getting a little uncomfortable. Not because I know that the house is unsafe, but because I don't know enough to help you price that risk into your decision. And that's a huge distinction that matters. A lot of buyers think that good agents are supposed to just say yes or no immediately, but honestly, I don't think that's the job. I think that the job is to help you understand what information is missing, how important that information is, and then what that information could cost you if you just ignore it. So that actually brings me to seller knowledge, which might be the most underrated part of the entire disclosure. A clean disclosure feels comforting until you learn that the seller barely knows the property. So think about something like an estate sale. The seller inherited the house from a parent, they listed it 3 months later, but they never actually lived in the house. The disclosure may have a lot of no known issues answers or no representation answers, and buyers like seeing that, but those words just don't carry the same weight as they would from someone who lived in the home for 12 years and they've maintained it personally. No known issues or no representation does not mean no issue exists. It means that the seller is not aware of one. And that difference becomes super important with inherited homes, with rentals, with investor-owned properties, any relocation, and particularly with vacant houses. A landlord might know the roof age and rent history, but have super limited knowledge about how the home performs on a day-to-day basis. An heir to a property may know almost nothing beyond what was found while they're cleaning the property out. A seller who lived there for a short time, they may honestly have no idea how the house behaves during a summer thunderstorm. So none of that makes the house bad, it just changes how much trust I'm going to put in the seller's disclosure. So if the seller's knowledge is super thin, then the inspection needs to be a little beefier. So I may want more specials input. We may spend some extra time on drainage or the crawl space or in the attic or on the HVAC or looking into termite history or in insurance questions. The point isn't to punish the house, it's just to stop pretending that blank answers are the same as verified answers. So military buyers, you need to pay attention here because PCS timelines can make vague information feel totally acceptable. You're busy, you got orders, your schedule is squeezed, the house checks most of the boxes, and the last thing you want is another delay. So this is exactly when the disclosure deserves more of your attention, not less. A rushed buyer is easy to surprise. So next I want to talk about insurance claims. So this is one of those sections that buyers kind of skim because it feels administrative, and that's a mistake. An insurance claim can reveal damage history, report quality, future insurance concerns, and sometimes a pattern that affects how you negotiate. But again, context is everything. A roof claim from a named storm is not the same as a repeated water loss inside the house. A small claim from a kitchen leak, totally different from a major claim involving mold remediation, fire damage, hail damage, plumbing failures, and flood-related issues. All those things create different questions. So what I want to know is simple in concept, but it's really important in practice. What happened? How much damage occurred? Who repaired it? And can we actually verify the work? So suppose the disclosure shows the claim for roof damage after a big hurricane. The seller provides the claim documentation, the contractor invoice, the permit information, and the warranty details. And now the roof is 3 years old and the inspection confirms the condition is consistent with that story. And that actually might be reassuring. But now let's consider a disclosure that mentions a water claim, but doesn't give any location, no cause, no repair records, and no clarity on whether the affected materials were removed or whether they were just dried out. So that's not the same risk. One claim gives us a paper trail, but the other just leaves us guessing. So insurance also matters because your future costs matter. If a home has a claims history, you may want to talk with your insurance agent earlier instead of waiting until the end of the transaction. You don't want to be days from closing and then suddenly learn that your policy is going to be way more expensive than you expected it to be, or that additional information is needed before the coverage can actually be issued to cover your house. So this is where the disclosure can protect your timeline. Not by giving you every single answer, but by showing you which professionals need to be involved before time gets tight. So now let's get into unpermitted work, because this one can look great in person and it can still create a problem. So a finished room over the garage looks super useful. A converted porch is going to add some extra square footage. An enclosed garage maybe could solve a layout problem. And a bathroom addition can make the house feel way more functional. During a showing, buyers usually just focus on how the space feels. But what I'm thinking is, how was this space actually created? Was there a permit that was required? Did anyone inspect the electrical work? Does the square footage match the tax records? Could the appraiser treat that space differently than the seller is actually presenting it? Will insurance view this as a finished living area or not? What happens when you sell the home later? A beautiful renovation with sloppy paperwork can become a future headache. So let's say a seller converted a garage into a bedroom. It has flooring, drywall, paint, a closet, and a little mini split unit. To a buyer, this feels like extra living space. But then we find out that no permits were pulled, the work was done by a prior owner, and the square footage being advertised doesn't match the public records. So now the issue is not whether the room looks nice, the issue is whether you're paying for something that may not function the same way legally, financially, or even practically. So that can affect the appraisal. It can affect resale value. It might raise insurance questions. And in some cases, it can create some safety concerns, especially if the electrical, the plumbing, or the structural work was involved that wasn't done by a licensed contractor. So the disclosure should make us curious before the problem becomes your problem. Termites, those deserve their whole own conversation, especially in South Carolina. A disclosure might mention prior termite treatment, some wood rot, some crawl space repairs, or a termite bond. Now, buyers can usually get spooked by the word termites, but in this part of the country, termite history, it's not totally unusual. What matters is whether the situation is active, treated, documented, and monitored. So a home with a prior termite activity, completed treatment, repaired damage, and an active termite bond might be easier to evaluate than a home with suspicious wood damage and no documentation at all. Again, the pattern matters more than the label. If the termite treatment appears alongside moisture problems, alongside wood replacement, alongside crawl space concerns, and drainage issues, now we're paying attention. So those details may be connected, and even if they're not, the combination still deserves a closer look. That's the type of thing that buyers miss when they read disclosures too quickly. They see separate answers. I'm trying to understand whether those answers all belong to part of the same story. So now let's talk about HVAC, because this is where future costs can sneak up on you really quickly. A seller disclosure might say that the HVAC is functioning, and that sounds fine until you learn the system is 18 years old, has had a whole bunch of service calls, and struggles to keep the upstairs cool, and also uses a bunch of older components that might be expensive to repair. So functioning today does not mean reliable tomorrow. If the disclosure mentions HVAC repairs, I want to see those service records. If the seller says the unit was replaced, I want the year, I want the brand, I want the contractor, I want the warranty status. And if one part of the system was replaced, but not the other one, that can also matter. The buyer might think, oh, well, the air was cold during the showing, but that tells us almost nothing. A system can perform during a 30-minute showing and still be on the brink of failure. So for military buyers using VA financing, this can matter because you may be trying to preserve cash after your closing. And dropping several $1,000s into HVAC repairs 6 months after moving in can wreck the budget really quickly. And that does not mean you should avoid every house with an older system. It just means you need to understand what you're actually inheriting. There's a big difference between buying a house knowingly and buying a house blindly. So here's where all of this comes together. A seller disclosure is not scary by itself. What scares me is when buyers use it emotionally. They fall in love with the house, so they minimize all the little problems. Or they see one scary phrase and they just assume the worst. Neither approach is going to make you any stronger. And the best buyers, they stay calm, they keep following the thread. If the disclosure mentions water, they ask about the source and the repair. When foundation work appears, documentation becomes the focus. An estate sale with limited knowledge is going to change the inspection strategy. Insurance claims need some context before they become conclusions. Unpermitted improvements, they require verification, not assumptions, and termite history calls for records, treatment, details, and bot information. Older mechanical systems, those deserve a realistic conversation about the remaining life and about replacement costs. So this is not a classroom checklist. This is how you protect yourself in the real world, because the house you buy is not just the house you toured. It's the house described by the disclosure, tested by the inspection, evaluated by the lender, insured by the carrier, and eventually lived in by you. So all those pieces need to make sense together. The mistake is treating them separately. If the house looks great, but the disclosure keeps creating unanswered questions, you need to pay attention. On the other hand, if the seller gives detailed answers and they back them up with documents, then our confidence goes up. But when the paperwork is vague and the repairs are expensive categories, you need to slow down a little. So if the story changes every time someone asks a follow-up question, that's a signal. The point is not to become paranoid. A good property can handle scrutiny. A solid repair can survive the questions. Clear documentation makes everybody's life easier. The deals that need you to stop asking so many questions are usually the ones that make me the most uncomfortable. So when that disclosure packet lands in your inbox, do not treat it like a formality. Read it before you get too attached. Mark anything that feels vague. Ask for receipts, for reports, for warranties, for permits, for treatment records, claim details, service history if all those things are appropriate. Bring in the right professional early on if the issue is outside of your lane. And if you're moving on PCS orders, build in enough time into the process to investigate before the deadline starts making all those decisions for you. The goal is not to find a perfect house. The perfect doesn't exist with houses. The goal is to get you to know what you're buying, what risks come with it, the repairs that are already handled, and where future costs might be hiding. That is how you make a confident decision. If you're buying with a VA loan, if you're preparing for a PCS move, or you're trying to avoid the kind of surprise that shows up after closing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I break down the parts of this process that most buyers just rush right through because those are usually the parts that end up costing the most when they go wrong. And if you're looking at a disclosure right now and one sentence doesn't sit right with you, that's probably not something to ignore. That is where the better questions start.